Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. High-level security talks between Taiwan and the US take place every summer. But will there be a special guest this year? With me to discuss this are Coen Blauuw, Senior Policy Advisor of Formosan Association for Public Affairs, or FAPA, who is visiting from Washington, D.C. FAPA is the largest Taiwanese-American political advocacy group in the US. And Chiang Lian Ren, former ROC ambassador to Indonesia and to Israel, and Chenlung Kuo, United Daily News deputy editor. Coen, Ambassador Chenlung, very warm welcome to the show today. China's envoy to Japan has said it's ludicrous for Japan to link Taiwan to its national security. Jianghao assumed his post in March after serving as envoy to Sri Lanka.
いわゆる台湾有事は日本有事という言い方がありますが、これはまたあまりにも荒唐無稽で危ない。中国の純内政問題を日本の安全保障と結びつけるのは非論理的だけではなく、極めて有害であります。
And Wu goes on to add, quote, if Japan is tied to a secessionist chariot, the Japanese people will be led into the pit of fire. Ambassador, you're a former diplomat. What do you make of Wu's comments?
Well, we have to look at the bigger picture at first. Since the 20th Party's Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, they have launched a multifaceted diplomacy. On the one hand, they are playing like a biased mediator, say in the Middle East. But on the other hand, in the Asia-Pacific affairs, they often offer the harsh rhetorics against the neighboring countries. In a way, it reflects a kind of a setback for their diplomacy in this area. And on the other hand, maybe it's because President Biden's success in uniting those countries together, from South Korea, Japan, down south to Australia and New Zealand. And the Philippines is the linchpin and the final touch for Biden administration's foreign policy in Asia-Pacific affairs.
Yeah,
so it becomes more harsh in rhetoric because kind of a setback for them.
I mean, Ambassador mentioned Philippines. Does it sound very similar to what the Chinese ambassador to the Philippines said about the overseas foreign workers living in Taiwan?
It's very disturbing what these Chinese spokesmen say about Taiwan. Of course, Taiwan is not an internal affair of China. It's Taiwan is a normal, independent, sovereign country, and if it were not for China's claims to the contrary, it would be just a normal country today. So all that nonsense about keeping Japan out of it, keeping the international community out of it, Taiwan deserves the support and needs the support of Japan, South Korea, the United States, and all these critical, important countries.
Chenlung, I mean, is it ludicrous to say that, you know, as Shinzo Abe, the late Shinzo Abe said, an attack on Taiwan is an attack on Japan? Is that ludicrous?
I think now there's more and more people in Japan realize that it's happened in Taiwan that would directly affect in Japan, because a lot of people in China are saying that if we want to prevent U.S. intervention, we should attack U.S. bases in Okinawa. That's an alarming bell for a lot of Japanese. So they are thinking maybe we should take this issue seriously and see the issue and cooperate with Taiwan and the United States and deal with it. And also I think that the Chinese ambassador, what he has said is sometimes reflect a tendency after the 20th Party Congress, but it also reflect there's individual differences. The former ambassador to Japan of China is he wouldn't say something like that. But the younger generation of diplomat, they want to impress the people the leader in Beijing. They will sometimes do the thing like that, right?
I see. However, there's also the old seasoned ambassador Liu Xiaoye,
right.
who is kind of in the vanguard, right? Ambassador, would you like to address what Coen said about that Taiwan is not an internal matter and the message, I guess, of this new Chinese envoy to Japan was, don't interfere in this internal matter.
We have to talk about this according to the Taiwan's constitution. It's one country, two regions, or two places. Taiwan is part of China. China is also a part of China. So as President Ma said many times, the one China means the Republic of China. And the People's Republic of China have never voiced any open criticism of his sayings. So China, Taiwan, internal affairs or special relations or one country on each side is very complicated matter. But however, Taiwan is now Republic of China is a sovereign country. We don't belong to China as its province.
Coen, so I mean,
I completely disagree, of course, with the honored ambassador, because if you are an American and you want to travel to Taiwan, you cannot go to the Chinese embassy to get a visa. If you want to travel to Beijing, you cannot go to Taiwan embassy, the Techro embassy in Washington, to get a visa. These are two different realities. These are two different countries. And I think we can just keep putting our head in the sand and come up with all these old-fashioned Kuomintang policies, views, and absurdities, really. But the reality, again, is that Taiwan is an independent sovereign country, and it's moving in the right direction, and we're waiting for the moment that it will be recognized by the rest of the world as such.
Ambassador, is it actually a reality that countries like Japan and the Philippines do treat Taiwan like it's an independent sovereign nation, as Coen said?
Well, this is international reality because we don't have diplomatic relations with either Philippines or Japan or South Korea. So in communicating with those countries, they treat us as some kind of non-official political entity, not as a sovereign state. This is a political reality. We have to accept it and try our best to improve relations with those countries.
And the ambassador was ambassador to Indonesia, and it's very popular in Indonesia to have shadow puppets. And I think this whole game of Twilight Zone realities that the ambassador is talking about, it reminds me very much of the shadow puppets in Indonesia, but it doesn't make it correct. Unfortunately, with all due respect, Ambassador.
Coen, despite this threat, these threatening words from China's envoy, Japan is understood to have expressed an interest in joining the Monterey talks, which is a high-level security talks between the US and Taiwan. You're the you are the senior policy advisor of FAPA.
Yeah.
Tell us how significant the Monterey talks are and how much of an appetite there is in Washington to actually invite Japan.
Let me first establish that for Japan, Taiwan is so critical. It is so crucial. The financial interest, the trade through the Taiwan Strait. The friend of mine works for one of these deep sea cable internet companies, and he says we will never let Taiwan be taken over by China because it would be a financial huge disaster for Japan. So Japan knows what is important. And the good news, I believe, is that indeed these annual Monterey talks between the United States and Taiwan, that Japan has now expressed interest to join. And we, of course, believe that it's very critical that they are the next ally to participate in these bilateral, then trilateral, and maybe we will add Australia and South Korea at some point. But that is a critical element, Japan, in that whole equation about keeping Taiwan free and independent.
And so as, part of FAPA, the lobbying group for Taiwan in Washington, you've been on the ground there. What's the likelihood?
There's a huge appetite for on the United States side, especially in the House and the Senate, in Congress, to invite Japan. I'm sorry. And so we are doing whatever it takes to make that happen, because the talks are actually coming up in a couple of weeks. So we need to act quickly, but I hope that the Japanese delegation can step last minute on EVA Air and join the Americans and the Taiwanese in Monterey.
I have no objection for Japan's participation in the Monterey talks. Yeah. I personally participated twice there. But we don't have to think too highly of the Monterey talks for its importance. If Japan do really join it, just a matter between United States, Taiwan, and Japan, and nothing to do with mainland China. So for the Chinese, there no way or no need for them to voice any objection to it. But these Monterey talks is a venue for military and civilians, high-ranking officials to get to know each other and conduct a war game. So it's not that important. But if Japan really joined, why not Korea or the Philippines? It'll be more meaningful for that talks.
So you don't think it would send a message? You don't think that China would be enraged by this? No.
You think China will be okay with this?
It has nothing to do with China. It's just matters between Taiwan and the United States.
Maybe that's the best way to proceed. Chenlung, could you cover off? I mean, Coen mentioned there the high importance of Taiwan to remain free, to remain independent.
Right.
Can you talk about what difference Japan would make joining these security talks?
I think it's going to be very important for Japan to join the trilateral Monterey talk if it ever happened. But the thing is, before Japan should ever join, Japan should have a security dialogue with Taiwan at first. I mean, this had never happened. So my hunch is that Japan is concerned if there's a Taiwan contingency that might affect the alliance between Japan and the United States, and that indirectly will affect Japan in that sense. So Japan concern is out of that context. It's not that Japan had a legal obligation to protect Taiwan's security. That's totally different. I think Japan concern about joining this Monterey talk is to asking or to know what exactly would happen if there's a Taiwan contingency and how Japan can help the United States in support in the operation. So I think that's the reason why they want to join.
And it's never a waste of anybody's time, or it's never unimportant for Taiwan to add friends to their group of friends, whether it's a Japan, the United States, or that's why Taiwan is so ambitious to get into international organizations. That's why Taiwan is so ambitious to get security arrangements with countries in the region. So it's never unimportant, I believe.
Ambassador, let's pick up on what Coen just said there. There seem to be three-way security partnerships that are, coming up. For example, Philippine President Marcos Jr. recently visited Washington. They talked about three-way security framework with Japan, and there's also talk of Philippines, US, and Australia, as Coen mentioned there. So what do all these trilateral groupings mean?
Again, put in a larger picture, because the United States tried very hard to organize a new containment policy towards mainland China, from Korea down to the New Zealand. And President Marcos visit the United States is serve as a linchpin for the whole structure. So no matter what happened in this area, the Chinese will pay a wary eyes on what's going on in this part of the world, because this is the sort of belly for China's policy right now. They are getting stronger or more influential in Africa, in the Middle East, but not in this part of the world.
Chenlung?
I think the number one Philippine security right now is on the South China Sea, especially its territorial and sovereignty issues, a quarrel with China. With the US and Japan plus the Australia coming to this collective security talk, I think that would further helping Philippines in strengthening its security. But it's a different kind of issue if the U.S. is want to get involved and sublet the bases from the Philippines. I think President Marcos has mentioned several times that the security pact with the United States is not against any potential enemies. It's certainly not against China. It's because Philippines is somehow try to win on both sides. They want to get the financial and economic aid from China. They don't want to offend China, but they also want to get the security guarantee from the United States. And that had played out in other Southeast Asian countries. I think that is what's going on right now.
Coen, so this is not necessarily about Taiwan. Do you agree with that?
It is all about Taiwan, and definitely for us, it's all about Taiwan. And you know, I believe that it is really, as I said earlier, it's critical to bring everybody in the group, bring everybody in the family, make the group of Taiwan supporters as strong as possible. The ambassador mentioned the diplomatic allies, Tonga, Nauru, Tuvalu, St. Kitts, Nevis, etc., etc. Thank you for your support, these countries. But don't forget that the countries who do not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan
European
are the best
countries,
friends.
yeah.
No, but are the best are the best friends. United States, Japan, you know, these countries, for them, Taiwan's security, keeping Taiwan free, keeping Taiwan out of China's hands, is in their joint interest. And that's why these countries care, and that's why we should appreciate, all we Taiwanese, that we should appreciate all the gifts and the support and all these efforts. People care, even if they don't have diplomatic relations.
Ambassador, I'll give you the last word on this. This is what Philippine President Marcos Jr. and Joe Biden in Washington said in their joint statement. They said they affirmed the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait as an indispensable element of global security and prosperity. Now, these were the exact same words as the statement, the joint statement with Yoon Suk-yeol of South Korea. What do you make of using exactly the same word?
Well, it's very natural for the Taiwan's neighboring countries to have voiced this kind of words, because though they are really very apprehensive of China's assertiveness in the South China Sea, and rapidly
the Taiwan Strait?
building up their military muscles. They're really worried. So on the one hand, they rely on the United States for security arrangements. But on the other hand, as Kuo mentioned, they have to pin their hopes for economic development with mainland China.
Okay.
Let me add one more thing. They mentioned Taiwan Strait, but they did not mention Taiwan in specific, because all those countries, Korea, Philippines, and United States, they are all agree on one China principles. So in that case, one China policy, in that case, they cannot talk about a part of China, but they do like to talk about Taiwan Strait because it's international water. All the ships that transit through the strait, that would be crucial for economy, and that's the general concern, and that is the public good in the world. So there's a slight difference in there.
And that's one of the critical reasons why we need to keep Taiwan free, because that will guarantee that the Taiwan Strait will remain international waters. What if indeed the Chinese take over, what if they annex Taiwan? Then everybody and their brother and sister need to ask permission to sail through the Taiwan Strait. The American 7th Fleet will have to ask permission to hide during a typhoon. But as long as we keep the Taiwan free, out of China's hands, Taiwan's the international borders of Taiwan will benefit the whole world.
Okay. In terms of the One China policy, Chenlung, however, generally, for example, the US, this is based on China pursuing peaceful means.
Right.
So I don't think that's contradictory. They can follow a One China policy,
Right.
and yet they can insist that China fulfills its obligation to be peaceful towards Taiwan.
I'm not defending for China, but there's two elements of One China policy, according to China. One, on one hand, China should resolve the Taiwan issue peacefully, but on the other hand, that Taiwan should not seek its independence. That's on two sides. And China is now blaming the US not putting enough pressure on Taiwan to seek for that One China approach. So that is, I think, the tricky part right now.
We believe that the One China policy is dangerous. And the One China policy is dangerous because it, in a way, condones Beijing's claim over Taiwan. Yes, the United States One China policy says we acknowledge China's claim over Taiwan, but what if China starts to annex Taiwan at some point and then the rest of the world complains? The United States will object and they say, but you acknowledged our position for the past 50 years. So the United States should have zero tolerance for the One China policy. So it's one of our priority campaigns on Capitol Hill.
Okay. Now, to talk about how the US and Japan are beginning to stand up to China, my next guest is Grant Newsham, retired Colonel, US Marines, and a Center for Security Policy Senior Fellow and author of When China Attacks, A Warning to America. I spoke to him earlier. Let's take a look. There's talk of Japan attending the Monterey talks in the US. How significant would this be?
Oh, it would be a huge deal. For one thing, that the Chinese would go absolutely berserk. But it would be a clear sign that the Japanese, while they've been less than assertive when it comes to military or even political support for Taiwan to date, participating in these talks would be a clear sign of whose side they're on. So if this actually happened, it would be a pretty significant step for the Japanese in particular, but also for the three-way U.S., Japan, Taiwanese commitment to defend democracy, to defend freedom.
And practically speaking, what could it mean for Taiwan's security?
Well, it would show a gradual sort of shift towards directly backing Taiwan by Japan. There's been a lot of debate over what Japan really intends to do, would do, but by getting involved here and taking the blowback that they will face from the People's Republic of China, it will show that Japan will provide, I'd say, the economic support, the political support, and while they may not say it directly, that there would be some military support forthcoming in the event of a so-called Taiwan-contingency.
I mean, you mentioned that Japan could be seen as having been slow. Is that something that you think is changing?
Well, I think Japan moves at its own speed. Sometimes you have to step back and look back 5-10 years to see how fast they've actually moved. And sometimes they do make some changes pretty quickly. And what Japan is doing these days is unrecognizable from what they were doing or even would think of doing a decade ago, even 5 years ago. So Japan can move fast, but when it comes to Taiwan, I don't know that they have made the necessary political or military preparations to really weigh in a Taiwan fight.
What would those be?
Well, you have to get your military ready to fight a war. And unfortunately, except for the Japanese Navy, most of the Japan Self-Defense Force isn't quite ready for that. There's some historic reasons for that, but they really have been remiss in getting the JSDF into a proper fighting force. Additionally, you have to get the populace psychologically prepared to maybe have to fight. You've got to get your economy in a position where it can withstand the blows that it is going to take, the disruptions that would happen in the event of a Taiwan contingency. War is not just something that happens over a weekend and then you get back to the way things were.
Your book, When China Attacks, you essentially talk about the war that's already started. And the title of the book is A Message to America. Do you believe that America is getting that message now and is also now spreading it to its allies, such as Japan and South Korea?
Well, compared to a few years ago, I think we do get it. Before the Trump administration, we didn't get it. The driving guidance from previous administrations was don't do anything that'll upset China. But now that's changed. We do have a long way to go. And the book actually has two meanings. One of them is a future attack, and the other is an attack that is ongoing. The book describes an attack that has been ongoing for at least 30 years, but on fronts that we don't consider warfare. The biological, economic, financial, psychological, proxy warfare, getting Americans to do their bidding, and the drug warfare that killed 70,000 Americans last year with fentanyl. These are acts of war. We just have chosen not to accept them, recognize what they are. I do talk about the so-called kinetic war, of course. I don't think it took the Americans, however, to tell anyone else what the problem was. I think, in fact, some of them knew it better than us. The Japanese, for example, have been warning the Americans for years about the Chinese. The Australians woke up quicker. The British may have even been a little ahead of us, not by much. But so we didn't actually have to sell this to anybody. And you'll notice that I was talking about these sort of non-kinetic warfare, the so-called political warfare. And Taiwan has been at the brunt of Chinese political warfare assaults for decades, probably since the day Taiwan set up shop some years ago. But Taiwan is really where the focus of the Chinese political warfare subversion efforts have been, to erode Taiwan's ability to defend itself, and also to erode Taiwan's allies and its friends' willingness and ability to come to their aid.
Mm. I mean, this was a theme of Tsai Ing-wen's speech when she visited the US. She was asking America or the world to consider this as warfare.
Well, I think they would. It's just a question of when. Do they wait until something really bad has actually happened? Or do they get ready preemptively? If we don't start weaning ourselves off dependence on the China market, that it just might be too late, but we do need to hurry. One thing I would like to see the Americans do is to give Taiwan a free trade agreement. All the talk is about weaponry and asymmetric weapons and asymmetric warfare. But for crying out loud, I wish the Biden administration would do a free trade agreement with Taiwan. The Trump administration should have done it. They didn't do it, but that would be as effective as the military support that we can give to Taiwan. So there's an economic aspect to Taiwan's defense that is too often overlooked.
And China itself has been accused of being tone deaf. But what do you think is going through the mind of Xi Jinping? He can see, these alliances, trilateral, bilateral, around Taiwan forming.
They do generally telegraph their punches, and when the Chinese communists say they are going to take Taiwan or get Taiwan one way or another, I'd take them at their word that they at least might give it a try. They're very clear about what they intend. Read Xi Jinping's speeches, or just take a week and read the Chinese press. You all can read it in Chinese, but even the English versions are blood-curdling enough. You have to realize the nature of that regime, and it depends on just constant aggression. It's in most respects, it's like a mafia group, a mafia gang, and it's all about power. It's all about domination.
In this US-China great power rivalry, which side do you think has the winning cards?
The free world, the free nations do, if we choose to play them. It does help if you've got four aces to actually play them and not hand two or three of them over to your rival, to the guy across the poker table. I would say that the free world it's got a very good hand to play. And the one thing it really has is legitimacy. These are governments that are accepted. They're chosen by their citizens. China doesn't have that. In fact, they're terrified of having a real election or any sort of election. And that shows a fundamental lack of, as I say, confidence in your own system. And really, that system is dependent on the inflow of foreign currency, technology, and investment. And that is a huge lever that we should play. And if we have to just disentangle ourselves from the PRC, the Chinese Communists, and have basically two separate blocks again, well, so be it. Taiwan ultimately represents a lie that represents the lie that is the Chinese Communist Party's mantra, that only the CCP can rule and Chinese people can only be governed with a boot on the neck. Well, look across the strait at Taiwan. That shows that is absolutely wrong.
That was Grant Newsham speaking with me earlier. Now, in March, 21 US Republican congressmen wrote to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken asking him to invite President Tsai Ing-wen to Apec, or the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. This year, the US is hosting this regional forum and gets to invite who it wants to the event. Despite Taiwan joining Apec in 1991, it has never once sent its president under pressure from China. TSMC founder Morris Chang has represented Taiwan since 2018. In their letter, the Congress members say Taiwan deserves fair and equal treatment on par with those of other recognition and standing in APEC member states, and not doing this sends the wrong message. Ambassador, if I could ask you first, what's your view about Tsai Ing-wen possibly attending APEC?
Well, since 1991, Taiwan has been proactively participating in APEC and made great contributions. Not only we donated fundings for APEC research group, but also we offer many initiatives like women's empowerment, to narrow down the digital dividend device, etc. So many issues have been actively participated.
Does it deserve full and equal treatment as other members?
Yeah, but for President Tsai's participation of the meeting, well, it's good in some way, but we have to think about the response from mainland China. I think it's really a red line for them, or a deep red line for them. What will happen is hard to say, hard to predict. Basically, it will be more serious than Pelosi's visit last August. Besides, it's so close to our next presidential election. So the results at this moment is unfathomable. So whether it's good or bad to Taiwan's position, we must do further review of this event. But I personally think it's just not worth the candle at this moment.
Not worth it.
I believe that this is a chance of a lifetime for the legacy for President Tsai, not only, but for Taiwan. And the last sentence in this letter says, "We, members of Congress, cannot let Beijing determine who comes to the United States or who doesn't." And I think enough said.
FAPA I think FAPA is the one pushing the most for this agenda. I think it's also a worthy cause for the Taiwan president to attend the APEC summit. But you know that APEC have a very delicate arrangement of this. Usually the host would send a delegation to Taipei and formally invite the Taiwan president to attend. And according to previous arrangement, we'll say that because the president had previous engagement, we cannot attend, so we ask someone else in place. And someone else, the replacement would have to be negotiated through Beijing. And that is really unfair treatment. I mean, if it's in the DPP ruling party, then it will be very difficult to send even the deputy president of Executive Yuan going to as a representative over there. So by U.S. hosting the Apec summit this year, it will be the best chance for Taiwan to get in the Apec summit. But somehow, this is also a very delicate thing that we should proceed cautiously. I think it's unfair to have Taiwan president not to attending the Apec, but we have to consider the consequences. It's the same thing. Our president meeting Speaker McCarthy in the United States instead of having him to visit Taiwan. The same logic here.
You mentioned the DPP. So if it was a KMT government,
they
would you say that?
They have even sent the Vice President Lian Zhan as their representative to APEC leadership meeting.
So is that double standards?
It's a double standard. China would say that because KMT had agreed on 92 consensus, so we can have it a higher level of representation in APEC leadership meeting. But it's according to different kind of ruling party they have, right?
Coen, Ambassador mentioned the upcoming 2024 in January elections in Taiwan. Obviously, there's also the US elections later in the year. What sort of impact would this, I mean, when we look back historically, when there has been Chinese aggression, this has actually played in the favor of the DPP.
Yeah, of course, we all remember that during President Lee's election in the previous century that the Chinese lobbed missiles in Kaohsiung Harbor, and God forbid, we hope nothing of the kind will happen. But on the other hand, the other side of the coin is that we have to see Taiwan's democracy continue to mature. Taiwan is such a political, economic, democratic miracle. And it's so unfortunate to me that the Kuomintang is still stuck in the previous century, maybe even the century before that. I think time has changed. Taiwan is a democracy. I went to the Jingmei Human Rights Museum just last week with my in-laws, and I thought, if you're a Kuomintang supporter, you should go visit that museum and see what the Kuomintang has done to Taiwan. And then my KMT friends said, yes, but the Kuomintang we have a new Kuomintang today. But you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So I believe, I hope that the voters in Taiwan will make they follow their heart and not their fear.
Coen, so talking about fear, how about what Ambassador said about possibly military action greater than after the Pelosi visit?
Yeah, nobody knows, of course, and it's all speculation and it's fear-mongering, but I believe that all these little steps which help Taiwan become a more normal country will ultimately lead to the moment where we say, yes, we did the right thing. We weren't afraid. We weren't afraid to vote for democracy or to make democratic movements. You can always be afraid, you can always wait, but we need to take action now, and I think this is the best US-Taiwan relationship we ever had in the world, for sure, and maybe even Taiwan's status in the world is the best since, 150 years ago, 120 years ago.
Ambassador, talking of this delicate balancing act, can we move to the CPTPP, or Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership? Again, we have essentially the Taiwan put in its entry bid in September 2021. This was, a week, 10 days after China. Now, if China joins first, it can veto Taiwan's entry. So what is the likelihood that China would enter first, in your view?
Maybe this is a technical matter, but I have to say that no matter whether it's DPP or KMT, we people in Taiwan, we want to see Taiwan Strait maintain peace and stability, no matter who's in power. I think this is the same idea for all the people, not only for the two political parties. So Kuomintang is now the opposition party, but it supports the peaceful relations with mainland China. It supports the stability of the Taiwan Strait. So there's a way, there are many ways to maintain this kind of communications or balance between the two sides. So more military supplies or procurement, a lot of military hardwares, I don't think is good for relations between the two sides, because there's no way we can compete with the military build-up from mainland China. That's not the best way to promote relations between the two sides. I think we have to push it peaceful ways, just like in the past.
Coen.
Yes, I can respond to the ambassador, but I don't think it's good for my heart. So I think I will respond to your question about the World Health Organization and about the CPTPP. And so I'm a very optimistic person. I'm a very positive person. My wife always says, "Why are you so positive and happy? It is annoying." But not on WHO and not on CPTPP, not on UN, not on ICAO, because yes, we do what we can through Congress, through the Senate, through the administration, have bills signed into law to say that the United States believes that Taiwan should join all these organizations. But don't forget that it's China's worst nightmare to see Taiwan in an assembly with Holland, Germany, France, Belarus, Lithuania, England, because that will be the ultimate recognition of Taiwan's being a sovereign, independent country. So I'm not optimistic about that. And so therefore what we do at FAPA since the past 34 years that I've been with FAPA, is that we try to do things where we don't find China in our path, like Taiwan Travel Act, 6 assurances, all that sort of thing, where it doesn't matter what China says, the United States can do it. Change the name of TECRO, the embassy, to Taiwan Representative Office, free trade agreement. So that's what I'm focusing more at the moment than on international organizations, because it's a little bit waste of time for me and my co-workers and limited staff and limited budget.
Going back a bit in history, Ambassador, was there actually a chance for Taiwan to remain in the United Nations alongside the PRC if it changed its name?
You take Palestine, for instance. The Palestine has gained diplomatic recognition from 138 countries out of 193. The UN treated Palestinians better than to Taiwan. So even in 1974, the PLO's leader, Yasser Arafat, he is just a chairman of that organization. He was granted to address the United Nations General Assembly. So if Taiwan can rejoin the United Nations, that's very good for us. We love to see it.
But
but the reality is that.
But we emphasize, Yin, if I may, that Taiwan needs to join with dignity, respect, as a new member under the name Taiwan, not as rejoining because they were kicked out during the old Kuomintang days. So that is critical to how we campaign for UN membership for Taiwan and World Health Organization. Dignity, respect for the 23 million people of Taiwan.
It's a joke. We don't have to rejoin it, because in the United Nations Charter, we're still a member of the permanent 5, the Republic of China, not peoples, still there.
Right.
But I think there's a difference on all the organizations we just mentioned. In terms of WHO and ICAO, they belong to the United Nations system, which is a sovereign state base. So that was run into a strong opposition from China. But CPTPP and WTO as well as Apec, they are all under the economy, since all territorial area. So I think we have a good chance of joining CPTPP, since in Apec we joined in 1991. That is under the consensus. If China wants to join in, they have to allow Taiwan to join at the same time. Also, it's true for WTO. And I think CPTPP, we also have a good chance because after China apply, we also immediately apply. So you have to bundle those two applications together. And now there's a very strong pressure against China if it's decoupling or there's a de-risk, they want to, there's a great pressure on Chinese economy, whether they should follow the international rule or not. So that kind of pressure can help Taiwan in promoting Taiwan membership in CPTPP. I think now is the time that we should pay more focus on the membership, and we should start to have a bilateral negotiation with all the CPTPP members in order to increase our chance.
I believe that there are delegation groups being sent by government to the member countries. Right. I mean, perhaps the solution is to either allow both countries, Taiwan and China, to join at the same time, or not allow either.
There is no legal hurdle for Taiwan to join any international organization in the United Nations system, in, you know, and even as Mr. Kuo says. But there's only one problem, one obstacle, one hurdle, and that's a political hurdle, and it's called China. So that's what it's all about. You know, don't look for little legal tricks to join the UN or the WHO. It's not going to happen. The only thing is China is the obstacle. China holds the lock, not the key.
Okay, Coen, let's wrap all of this up. Let me quote to you something that Grant Newsham told me in the interview. He says that China is a system that is actually dependent on the inflow of foreign currency, technology and investment. And essentially what he's saying is that the rest of the world has a huge lever to play. And he says, basically, if we have to split into two blocks, so be it.
Yeah.
Is the world moving in that direction, according to you?
I believe so, yes. You know, it's amazing for me, having been on Capitol Hill for 35 years, to see how China has completely lost any clout momentum. It started with Trump in 2018, I believe, and it's been, you know, taken over by President Biden. And on the other hand, I've never met a member of Congress who says, I don't like Taiwan, I don't want to help Taiwan. And so for us, as a relatively small grassroots organization, having a good product of freedom, human rights, democracy, self-determination, that is what members of Congress support. I understand that the People's Republic of China lobbyists are very frustrated when they go to Capitol Hill, because everybody, members of Congress will say, how about the Uyghurs? How about moving the capital? How about the Tibetans? How about the Taiwanese? How about the Falun Gong? So that is important to members of Congress. And so that's why I believe that Taiwan, this is the chance for Taiwan to shine and to soar and to, you know, to become a full normal country as soon as possible.